do yourself a favour, check out the Carlisle Cult Cinema Club, and don't forget not just to rate it, but also to subscribe on YouTube or Facebook.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's me, PD, back with another Carlisle Cult Cinema Club, and I've got a cracking episode of the Carlisle Cult Cinema Club Presents. I'm thrilled to introduce a true legend in the world of talk shows. He's a comedian, game show host, radio DJ, film critic, the man behind the Incredibly Strange Film Show, a series that introduced me to so many cult filmmakers of that era. He's not only a comic book creator, but also the king of all things geeky and a collector like myself. Please join me in welcoming the brilliant, fantastic, and sometimes controversial and all-round top bloke, Jonathan Ross.
What a fabulous introduction. Thank you, Paul.
A fabulous introduction for a fabulous bloke.
Well, let's saying that at the end of our chat.
Well, to kick things off with, as a man who loves moo-moos, I love a moo-moo, and I do believe you do yourself. What's the attraction to you?
You mean a moo-moo? Like an all-in-one kind of like garment?
Yeah.
I hate to disillusion Paul. I'm not a big moo-moo fan. I do like a samui. I like a yukata, the Japanese kind of casual wear like that. But I don't go for them. I have got a maxi dress, but it was a designer maxi dress that I bought, Rick Owens, and I wore it to Comic-Con. It's like long, floor length, sleeveless. This was back when I was in better shape, had some good guns on me, and I wore it to Comic-Con, and people just thought I was doing shit cosplay as a Cenobite, but not bothering putting the pinhead things on.
Oh, that's brilliant.
So I got it's mildly embarrassing. And I don't know if you ever worn a maxi dress. I imagine it's tighter than a moo-moo. And I tripped over it. I was in Hall H at Comic-Con, which is the huge hall where they do the big unveilings of Marvel stuff and Game of
Yeah.
And I was in a very tight kind of seat now. And as I got up to leave after the thing I was watching, my legs got caught in the maxi dress and I fell and landed on two women sitting next to me who had big bags full of merchandising. And I think they thought I'd lunged on them. It was quite an embarrassing moment. And I had to sort of worm my way off them and get out of the hallway. It was, so even though I've still got the maxi dress, it doesn't come out much anymore.
Fair dues. Right then, let's get started on the interview properly. I just thought I'd drop the moo-moo thing in there.
I love a moo-moo. I love the idea of a moo-moo.
I wear them all the time.
Comfort first.
Yes, that's it. Don't wear them going out, mind you, just around the house.
Well, maybe you should. My son goes out. He works at home. He's a video game coder. And he goes out and he mainly sometimes he bungs a jacket over top, but he mainly just goes out wearing his pajamas. I mean, they're sort of day pajamas. They're not the old-fashioned striped banana pajamas. And the men in the local shops, they call him Pajama Man. And I said to him once, do you not want some more formal clothes? He said, Dad, no one lay on their deathbed thinking, I wish I'd worn more uncomfortable clothing in my life.
Well, this is true. This is true. Very wise words from a young man. So let's start your career. Young lad, Rice Krispies advert. How did that all come about?
Well, my mum, we were very kind of, in many ways, average working class family. But I suppose what made us not average or not usual was that my mum and dad, although they were both had left school, I think my mum left school when she was 13 and my dad when he was 15, and they both grew up in, not great circumstances, but they were very interesting people because they were kind of like, in the way a lot of working class people were, they were kind of self-improving. My dad read a lot when he was young. My mum loved movies, films, the idea of show business. And I think she saw an article in a local paper somewhere saying, big families wanted for commercials. They're looking for people to do what, so you didn't really need to act. And it mentioned there was a newspaper called The Stage, which still goes today. And sometimes there'd be agencies advertising. So she bought a copy and she looked for one that was looking for families for adverts. And she took us all off, dressed us all up as nice as possible, washed our hair, cleaned our teeth, took us over from our house in East London all the way over to near Chiswick, I think it was, to meet an old lady called Wendy Wisby, who had the Wendy Wisby Theatrical Agency. And they said, oh, yeah, we'll see, if we take some photographs, we've got some work. And so it was a way of sort of supplementing the family income, but also I think in some way fulfilled my mum's desire for us to do something more with our lives than just go through the path that seemed to be preordained for working class families. And so we kind of had a toe in show business in a very weird way, in that way, you know. And as a result, my mum managed to do a few adverts and she got an equity card, and so she would do some extra work, and she finally wound up for a while being one of the kind of background artists in EastEnders for a few years. And my dad had an equity card somewhere. I think he got it in a dodgy manner, and we all used to share it. So when I became a young man, the name on the card was John Thurston. And when this agent would find out and said, "Is John available for work?" The answer was always yes, because one of us, either my dad or one of his 3 elder sons, would turn up and do the day's work. So as a result, I'm in one very weird movie with my father, in fact, where we kind of we're soldiers, Israeli soldiers in the raid on Entebbe, in a film called The Rise and Fall of Idi Amin.
I've got it down here to ask you about that.
There you go. So we're in that. We did a night shoot for about 30 quid, which was a lot of money back then. It was delightful when I was a student, so it really supplemented my income. And we just had to run in with guns and in the gear, and like all the hostages were there. And someone who could speak Yiddish said, "They unsara boys." We went, go on. And that was it. It was a very exciting night's work. And when I finally got to see the movie, because it didn't get a theatrical release, I don't think, it was kind of a low budget, semi-exploitation, slight with a bit of softcore porn in it. And so that scene is intercut with Idi Amin enjoying a threesome. So it's worth your time digging it out, I think.
I've got it on VHS.
Well, there you go. Well, look out for that. When he starts banging away, wait for the soldiers to run in. One's me, one's my dad.
That's brilliant. By the way, you can swear as much as you want on here.
I try not to swear too much, but I'll swear as much as I normally do.
That's brilliant. And you were also, according to IMDb, you were an extra on the brilliant Breakingglass.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether I'd say it was brilliant, Breakingglass, but certainly it was interesting. Yeah, I had a day's extra work on that. There was a big kind of carnival scene where Hazel O'Connor is performing on a float, and I think the mob gets angry, and we were meant to all be skinheads, but I didn't want to shave my hair for the day, so I just put a trilby on and tucked it all underneath. But they'd made the mistake, and this was in that period, slightly post-punk, but slightly pre-new romantic, you know, so there was like punk, and then there was the bands were all founding around. So you had a beginning of the mod movement, the beginning of some power pop stuff going on, the resurgence of the skinhead kind of thing, but more, and that had kind of racist overtones because that kind of coincided a little bit with the rise of the National Front. And they made the mistake of inviting a lot of genuine skinheads who, of course, didn't fucking behave themselves and started fighting we were given some fake bricks to fight Hazel O'Connor. They started lobbing some real fucking bricks.
Bloody hell.
Yeah, so I remember, and the awful thing about that is, and once again, if you've got that, you might be able to see it. I went to see that at the cinema, very excited. I thought, this is my big break. Even though I'm one of about 1,000 people, I thought, I bet I look good on screen. You know, I bet I'll have some of that James Dean quality. And I remember on the day filming it, looking around, trying to work out where the camera was to see whether I was in it, because there were so many people there. And when you actually finally see the scene, it's this crowd scene. And if you look down either bottom left or bottom right, there's one idiot in this all crowd who's staring straight at the camera. And that's me. And I'm looking up like, wait, is that the camera? Oh, yeah.
You were destined to be in front of a camera. Let's just say that.
Not in that way, but it was certainly, they're fun memories.
Oh, I bet you they are. I mean, you've got 543 IMDb credits and 32 of them acting, mostly where you're playing a version of yourself in. But, I mean, iconic. Well, I mean, you played a footballer in Murphy's Mob.
I don't remember that. I mean,
and you played a footballer in Terry and June.
Oh, Terry and June. We were just like street kids playing football outside of Terry and June's house. And we were making too much noise. And the storyline was that Terry came out to tell us to stop. And then he didn't reappear. And then June hears him going, June, June. And she comes out. And because we were street toughs, we had popped him into a basketball net. And so he's sitting up in the basketball hoop, and we were him. And I remember at the time thinking, this can't be safe, because they filmed it. I think it might have been on location. It might have been a set. I'm trying to remember. But it was just a regular basketball hoop on a stand and that. And then they just had a ladder. And poor old Terry Scott, who wasn't a young man then, just had to climb up and sit in this fucking hoop. And he was just sitting there. And I thought, oh, there was no net, no mattresses from the floor, no crash mats, and he had to sit there for about an hour. And I remember thinking, God, I thought, and he was a big star to me growing up. I love Terry Scott, of course. And I remember thinking that can't be how you treat successful performers. You make them just sit in a regular basketball hoop for half an hour with no safety. But I guess times were different then.
They were very much so. Because obviously the Carry On films have been a big part with your family, with your brother Robert doing all the Carry On stuff as well.
Oh, no, Robert and I are not related.
All right. I always thought you was related.
No,
I
I've met him a
apologize.
few times. He sought me out because he knew I had an appreciation for that kind of thing. You know, when I first started my talk show in the 80s, The Last Resort, I was always keen to. It was kind of at the period when what was then called alternative comedy was coming up, and I liked a lot of that comedy, but I found it slightly disappointing that they were dismissive of the performers that came before. You know,
Yeah.
and I'd grown up loving Benny Hill, loving Bob Monkhouse, loving Frankie Howard, loving Terry Scott, you know, and there was a sort of feeling that Terry and June was held up as an example of the worst thing on TV. And actually, sure, it was cozy and it was sweet and it didn't relate to reality much, but it was brilliantly made. And June Whitfield was amazing. Terry Scott was amazing. And I loved that. You know, I loved the two Ronnies. And so I went out of my way to try and have them on as guests as well as the new people. You know, in fact, I'd rather have had them on because they had more to talk about. And I think, and as a result, I became quite friendly with a few of them. I became friendly with Frankie Howard before he died, and Peter Cook I knew well, and you know a few of the other ones. And I used to have people on. I had Stephen on. I can't remember his second name. Who played Blakey and on the buses. You know,
yes.
I liked all that stuff, and I can see why it doesn't stand up to, you know, the kind of criticisms that might be leveled against it today. Of course, most of those things were a product of their time, but I grew up loving them, you know, and I didn't want to follow fashion and say this is not good because I thought it was good still. And I think that's
I mean, you were kind of at the cutting edge of comedy in all of this kind of talk shows you've done from The Last Resort onwards. You always had them cutting edge comedians on. Saturday Zoo was great fun stuff.
Yeah, Saturday Zoo, which was a massively unsuccessful show, but we did have Charlie Higson and Paul Whitehouse on it every week. Vic and Bob on it most weeks. We had what's his name? Steve Coogan doing Paul Calf, and then his sister, was he called Linda Calf? Pauline, of course, which was brilliant. But they were the bits that worked. The bits that worked were these very talented people I was lucky enough to drag in. The bits that didn't work really in that show were the bits featuring me. But it was a good show. So I suppose my role in terms of like having good taste was important to that. But certainly it was exciting seeing these people come up and just, you know, do these kind of new comic performances and be witness to that was thrilling.
I mean, I've got some great memories of, I mean, the bit with Christopher Walken on the Saturday Zoo was.
Oh yeah, well that was my idea because we had him on and the interview bits were not fitting comfortably with the rest of the show. And I said, well, we should try and get them to perform something. And I just said, he's got such a weird intonation. Let's get him to do a children's story. And he liked the idea. And since then, a few other talk shows in America have had him do the same thing. But we absolutely did it first. He did the Three Little Pigs for us, and it was amazing.
Yeah, I've watched it again on YouTube a while back, and it's still funny. Now, because you started as a researcher at Channel 4, and how did you make that jump from the researcher to The Last Resort, basically?
Well, the interesting about Channel 4 is when Channel 4 appeared, it was kind of easier to get into TV than I imagine. I don't really know, of course, because I'm in, but then it probably would be now because Channel 4 was started and the government, it was quite an interesting, I think it came out of the Thatcher government because obviously they were very keen to like, you know, promote business, promote entrepreneurship, promote kind of like, you know, basically turn things into a more overtly capitalist model. And TV was sort of a closed shop in a way. You had BBC, which was beginning to change, but was still kind of a bit of an old boys network. And you had ITV, which didn't resemble the ITV we have today, of course. It was a bunch of regional companies that had franchises that were allowed to make. So there's one in Newcastle, and there was one in Scotland, and there's one in kind of Norwich, I think, and there were a couple in London. In London, you had Thames TV, which did the weekday stuff, and London Weekend Television. But they were all, you know, you got into them they were sort of jobs for life almost. You know, it was hard to get into, and they weren't really catering to a young audience. And when Channel 4 started up, the remit was that there had to be a large number of the shows had to be made by independent production companies, which didn't exist before that, because those big companies didn't look outside of their own kind of hired stuff. And so suddenly had this explosion of small companies. And so I was working for a few of them. And of course, they were also looking to make shows that weren't being made by, you know, ITV and BBC. And so they were looking for youth television or new television, music television. And first of all, I worked as a researcher on a talk show called Loose Talk, which wasn't a great show, but it was a good idea behind it. And that's how I learned what I was doing. And then I went and worked on various other different productions, sometimes music, sometimes documentary, basically learned a little bit how to make TV. But my friend and I always loved American television. I'd seen a few episodes of old shows like Carson and Ernie Kovacs. I think I got hold of them on VHS from a guy who used to get me cult movies. And I loved the kind of weirdness of it, because TV back then, in a way, the grammar of television hadn't been agreed upon. So you could do a talk show, but you could do a skit in the middle of a talk show, and you could do a variety show, but you could go outside the studio, even back then when camera technology was so different, and you could film people walking down the road or jumping in a swimming pool. And we didn't have that kind of inventiveness anymore. That had gone. And then someone mentioned David Letterman to me, and Letterman was deliberately trying to recreate the feeling of those early talk shows, but with a very modern kind of humor. And so we loved that. We managed to get hold of two of them. Back then, of course, it's hard for people to realize, but not just prior to things like YouTube, but this is before the internet existed. You know, this is before mobile phone existed. I mean, when I wanted to find cult movies for the Incredibly Strange Film Show, I found a few like-minded souls. But there was a guy called Gary something who was advertising VHS copies of Herschel Gordon Lewis films for sale. He was running them off up somewhat near, like, I think outside of Liverpool somewhere. And so I'd send him a postal order to get him to send me copies of, like, Blood Feast. And, like, you know, I think I got Corpse Grinders off him as well, because it was impossible to find that kind of media. And then I found there was a company in America, I think it was Psychotronic, but it might be one of the other video companies where you could buy them. But once again, pre-internet, it was hard to order stuff from America, because you had to write a fucking letter and put some money in a check or a kind of a American money order and post it off and hope for the best. And then, like, 2 months later, you might get a box of VHSs back, which would be American standard VHSs. So you had to get an NTSC player to watch them on. So we really had to slog and work for it. I've gone off the kind of plot here again, but how I got into TV really was I was working behind the scenes, very different times. And we came up, we could see that having a company would be the only way to have any kind of control or make things and also earn money, because we wanted to do well. And so we came up with a few ideas, and this was one of them, was doing an English type version of a Letterman show with elements of early Carson, maybe a bit of Kovacs, early Carr, and Jack Parr, rather. And we pitched at Channel 4, and they liked the idea, and we went in and pitched it again. And then we came and we said, well, we do this kind of thing and this kind of thing. And we stole some ideas from Letterman. We stole some ideas from other shows. We made up some ideas ourselves, and we couldn't agree on a host. And then I remember approaching a few people to host it. One was Jeremy Hardy, who I'd seen live at the Edinburgh Festival. I thought was amazing. And he, unfortunately, though, I approached him while he was taking a pee in the toilet. He told me to fuck off, which was quite understandable. And years later, he was a guest on the show, and he said, I told you to fuck off, didn't I? When you would have given me this show. And I said, yeah. And he said, that's something I will always regret. But he was a very sweet man. And but the whole time we were pitching this, I would be the one who would bring the ideas alive in the meeting. And then I kind of wanted to do it, but I felt too embarrassed to say that I wanted to do it. And then they finally said, well, do you want to try it? And I was like, delighted. And then I did a couple of, like, brief appearances. I did some open mic spots at the Comedy Store in London when it was rougher back then, but I did like 5-10 minutes just to get the feeling of what it was like to stand in front of an audience. Yeah. I realized I'd be standing in front of an audience, and I'd never done that. And I'll be honest with you, it terrified me for years, despite trying my best to overcome it. But then we did a pilot, and they liked the pilot and went with the show. And it's actually remarkable. And I don't think something like that would happen today. You know, quite a big production being built or being given to someone who had absolutely no on-screen experience whatsoever. I mean, really, I'd never done anything like it. But luckily for me, and I guess luckily for them, it worked. It clicked, and it got a good audience.
Well, it was my first introduction to you. I'll have been about 12 at the time. And that was it. I became a fan because I like chat. And as you say, your style was very much of the American talk shows, but you were on Carson and you were on Letterman a couple of times.
I went on Carson once when, I might have been twice, when Jay Leno was hosting it. And I did Letterman at least once. I was flown out to do it another time, and they bumped me because they had a guest when he wanted to talk to, and I was quite relieved, to be honest with you. And I wound up going to dinner with Penn and Teller, who I knew. They were in New York. I remember saying to him, they said, "Oh man, you were bumped." I said, "I'll be honest, I'm fucking relieved. I didn't really have anything much to say, and I wasn't confident." And he went, "That's the first time I've heard anyone be excited to be bumped off a talk show." And I was just thrilled they paid to fly me to New York, and I had 2 nights in New York. That was when I was promoting a series I'd done for VH1. But I knew that, because Letterman to me was this kind of godlike figure, the greatest on that kind of thing. And I think he still is the greatest at doing that kind of show.
Yeah.
But it's quite a narrow cast kind of show in a way. But no, I did do those American shows. Jay Leno was charming and very friendly and nice. And I seemed to, I've been offered work in America over the years. I did a series with Penn and Teller, and they wanted me to go back and do more. But I didn't enjoy working in Vegas. It's a bit of a weird, I don't gamble, I don't drink. So it's kind of a weird place to be hanging out for a long period of time. And my wife, quite understandably, because our kids live here and her work is here really. She can work in America, but obviously she didn't want to come out for 2.5 weeks and just sit in a grotty hotel room. So I was on my own the whole time. So I found it very depressing. So I didn't do more. But that would have, so, and I was offered a talk show in America years ago as well. But once again, my family were young then, and I thought, I don't want my kids growing up in a country where they have metal detectors at schools and there are shootings on a, unfortunately, far too frequent basis. So I've never chased that kind of thing, even though Letterman was my kind of hero. And it might have been nice to see if I could have worked in America. But I don't think I would necessarily have really been able to pull it off over there, because I think my reference points are very UK, and my approach is very UK.
And then obviously after that, the Incredibly Strange Film Show. How did that come about, and what was it like interviewing the kings and queens of the bees? Because, I mean, you were a big fan of Russ Meyer and stuff like that. He's, Faster Pussycat Kill Kill was one of your favourite films, I believe.
Yeah, I liked most of those films. I tell you what I liked about the Incredible Film. What my kind of my desire to do it was, I wanted to expose a larger audience to that kind of stuff, but in a positive way. Because the only stuff I'd seen on TV about it previously had been the Medved brothers did a show. I can't remember what it was called now, but they a certain notoriety to Plan 9 from Outer Space. And it was basically them saying these are the worst movies ever made.
Oh, was it the Golden Turkey Award?
Yeah, it was the Golden Turkey. That? And I remember thinking, I was quite glad to see the clips, but I hated their approach because I didn't think these were bad movies. I thought they were obviously low budget movies, and movies made against all the odds. A bad movie for me is a movie like Fountain of Youth, which is just dropped on, I can't remember I think it's Apple TV, directed by Guy Ritchie, with a big budget and a big cast and a good director. And it's a piece of shit.
I haven't seen it yet, so I can't.
It's like a cautionary tale as to how to make a very uninteresting and tedious and just kind of bad movie with all the things that you might need available to you. Whereas when I see something by Ted V. Michaels or Russ Meyer, what I loved about Russ's stuff is he's an auteur. It's whether or not, I mean, obviously he was obsessed with breasts, but regardless of that, and that isn't why I loved his films, although I'm fond of breasts as well. But what I loved about his films is they had a unique vision. It was his sensibilities on screen. And the same with Ted V. Michaels, although Ted V. Michaels I love because he was a sort of romantic who was just addicted to making films and telling stories. He was a lovely, lovely man. And I love John Waters' films because they were so kind of like peculiarly his work. You know what I mean? So I was looking for stuff which was coming from an individual's point of view. That's one of the reasons why I never did Roger Corman and I didn't do Charles Band, because even though I like a lot of the movies that they're both involved with, both of them are just businessmen. And they're businessmen who happen to, in their businesses, create some amazing films, but they weren't personal to them in any way. It was just like, how can I turn around a quick knockoff of Jaws, or a quick kind of like, you know, or what's a free piece of fiction I can use? Oh, Edgar Allan Poe's in the public domain. Okay, we'll make an Edgar Allan Poe film, and some of their Poe films are amazing, but it wasn't like he cared about it. You know, I wanted so the Incredibly Strange Film Show really was me wanting to expose a larger number of people to these, I thought, kind of like brilliant, quirky, strange individuals who couldn't help themselves but make films. You know, and because I'd had some success with The Last Resort, Channel 4 up for it, and I just couldn't believe that they allowed us to do it. And I'm so pleased we got the chance to do it then, because so many of them have gone since then, of course. And I kept in touch with quite a few of them. But it was quite, to be honest with you, the thing is though, I can't say I enjoyed making it particularly, because it's hard. Making shows is hard, especially ones you care about, and especially ones which are sort of like peculiar. Because I went out there and I felt this responsibility, and I thought, oh my God, is anyone going to watch this? Is anyone else going to see in this subject what I see in it? Am I doing a good enough job, or am I just going to make people think, why the fuck are we looking at this clip from Corpse Grinders, which is not a great moment in cinema history, clearly, and you can see that props are involved and the special effects aren't great. Will I be able to manage to convey what makes this, to me, what makes this so great? And I think I mainly pulled it off. I mean, I feel, but to go back to what you said about make it, you know, I felt nervous. I was worried. And also, most of them, not all of them, but some of them were fucking weird people. You know, I mean, like Russ, I loved Russ Meyer, but he was a nightmare to deal with. Somewhere here, I've got old yellowed faxes he used to send me in the middle of the night complaining about something and saying we had to buy this and we had to, we moved his truck. He was a little scam artist. We moved his truck. He had his big old truck, like a pickup truck they used to go on location with, parked outside his house in Hollywood. And because we wanted a shot of the house and we were walking up, I went in, I said, Russ, could we move your truck across the road? So he went, well, you can move it. Who's going to drive it? And I said, well, I won't, because I've just passed my test. I was fairly young then. But Andy, the director, came. Now, Andy Harris, who's now gone on, he's the guy who produces The Crown and big shows like that. He was the director of those. He'd fallen out with Russ because he liked Russ before and tried to get a South Bank show off the ground. Melvin Bragg had said no, so Russ thought Andy was a time waster. So we had to pretend Andy wasn't directing it. So Andy was just floating around doing odd jobs almost, and I was pretending to direct it, but Andy directed it. And he drove the truck across the road. Literally drove this truck 50 feet across the road. We got into London, I get a fax spooling out, coming out page after page, handwritten by Russ, saying how we'd broken the crankshaft and the something under his truck, disgusting behavior, driving there. We had to pay for it. So we had to send him like $2,000 to pay for his truck that we had not broken. And then he wrote another thing complaining about how we'd bothered people at his local bowling alley because we'd asked them if we could use the location for. So there was always this stuff. But something with Russ was, I think he had been so badly treated and ripped off by so many people over the years. Sometimes it was a test. It was him seeing whether you did like his stuff, whether you were. Yeah. So I kind of counted Russ as a friend. You know, he came over here once and I interviewed him on stage at the British Film Institute. And I took him for dinner afterwards. It was his birthday. And so, you know, I knew Russ a little bit and I kept in touch with him towards the end. Ted V. Michaels, I kept in touch with. For a while. John Waters still sends me a Christmas card every year and I send him one back. So Sam Raimi, I'm still loosely in touch with. So all these guys who I loved from their early work, you know, I still kind of like had some connection with. And I'm very proud of those shows because so many people love them and talk about them to me today. And once again, though, I can't help but feel like I was lucky because I loved that material, but I spotted the potential in it. And I was fortunate enough to be in a position where I could get something a little bit unusual on television. And manage that. And Edgar Wright always is very generous. He always thanks me and says that it was watching the Sam Raimi episode that led him to believe that actually maybe he could get into the film industry, that he could make films. And he always credits it with that, which is great. And currently he's working with my wife and daughter on something. So it's a strange full circle.
Oh, brilliant. I mean, it opened, coming from a small northern city, Carlisle, it just blew my mind. And it opened up so many films I had to see. I'd heard of John Waters because I'd seen Polyester and Pink Flamingos.
Well, Polyester got a theatrical release over here, didn't it? With the kind of scratch and sniff cards.
I've got a scratch and sniff card.
I've got about 4. Don't try and out-geek me. Come on, Paul. What are you thinking?
Sorry, you are the king of the geeks. I should have known you'd have more than one.
Mine were given to me by John Waters. There you go. Come on.
Well, there you go. I bought mine for 30 quid on Facebook about 6 months ago.
You know what? That was the best 30 quid you ever spent.
It's brilliant. But yeah, I can remember going to see Hairspray because it came out just after the show had been on. And I was supposed to be going on a date with this girl, and she didn't turn up. And I thought, well, I'm still going to see Hairspray, and I was the only person sat in the cinema.
Oh, really? I'm the only one? I mean, I was amazed at how great Hairspray was. The first film, not the musical. I don't care for the music.
Yeah.
Although I'm glad it happened because it's made John Waters a comfortably well-off man. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't have been. But I went to the premiere of the first one. We were filming with John Waters, and we didn't even know because back then, pre-internet, you didn't know what people were up to. So we didn't know he was filming this big movie. When I reached out to him to do the Incredibly Strange Film Show, and he said, well, I'm making a movie right now, but when are you going to come over? We said, well, think about it. Then he said, well, if you can move it, you can film at the premiere of this film I'm bringing out. And I thought, oh, my God. And I assumed it would be another one of his low budget, like a Desperate Living or Pink Flamingos. But we were amazed, and it was such an exciting night to be there. It's in the program because there had loads of people dressed in 50s and early 60s clothing. The mayor of Baltimore was there. All the cast were there. So we stood outside the cinema and went to see it on its first ever showing in Baltimore itself, which was just such an amazing, it was amazing good luck for us. But unfortunately, Glenn, who was Divine, we chatted to him briefly that night, but we rearranged so that we would be there in Baltimore. Then we were going to fly to LA and do all the West Coast stuff and move back across the country and finish back in Baltimore, then New York to do the show. So the main interview with Divine was booked for when we came back, when I was doing the main interview with John Waters. And then we flew to LA, and then Divine died. He died a few nights, or I think 2 nights after the Hairspray premiere. It was very, very sudden. So we didn't get a big interview with him for that. I'd already interviewed him on The Last Resort. I'd flown him over to do The Last Resort years ago, about a year before. So I'd done him then, but we missed him on that show, which was a great shame. And such a shame for him to die then before that became so mainstream. What was the counterculture stuff. He's very good. He's good in a film. There's an Alan Rudolph film you might not have seen. Have you seen the film Trouble in Mind?
I know it. Many years ago, but I know the film.
It's a good film with a great soundtrack. The soundtrack is by Alan someone. Oh, I'm trying to remember his name. I've got the soundtrack album, and it's got the lead song was sung by Marianne Faithfull. Really good soundtrack to it. And Glenn plays a guy in it. He's not in drag. He's straight for once. And he plays a kind of Sydney Greenstreet villainous kind of character. It has Chris Christopherson as well. It's a good film, if I remember correctly. I really liked it. It's an Alan Rudolph film. Oh, no, and the music is by Mark someone. Directed by Alan Rudolph. But anyway, so he'd begun to move into the mainstream, is what I was saying. And I always felt it was such a shame for him that he didn't get to enjoy that period longer.
Yeah, I mean, because he'd had the song out, Walk Like a Man, and Lust in the Dust was a bit more kind of mainstream as well.
I did like Lust in the Dust much. So it felt to me like someone trying to do a John Waters movie without knowing how to do a John Waters movie, you know.
It's not too. I enjoy it, but
it's okay.
Yeah. So I mean, you've said you've kept in touch with them as well.
Some of them, yeah. Well, not so much now. Most of them are dead. John Waters is still alive. Russ is gone. Ted V. Michaels is gone. Sam's still alive. I'm just trying to think the other ones. Jackie Chan, I'm still in touch with from the second series. Chung, he came to my office here in London, and I've got a fantastic. When I was filming that, I've got a shitload of treasures in the other room. When I was filming the Jackie Chan show, and it was the first kind of big Western profile of him, really. And I'd loved his films since I'd found a few on VHS. There used to be a shop run by Rick Baker here and Toby Russell called Eastern Hero.
I've interviewed Ricky Baker. He's a great character.
Ricky's great. Toby's great. And they had a shop, and I used to go and buy VHS from there sometimes at the weekend. And he helped us with that. We said, look, we want to do Jackie Chan. And when Jackie came over, when we were filming it in Hong Kong, Golden Harvest Studios was just shutting down. And we were at Golden Harvest Studios. He was filming a film which turned into, it was called something, in the end, it was called something like Pocket Full of Miracles or something like that. Not one of his bigger movies, but fun. And so we were on location there with him. And we went in the offices, and I met the head of Golden Harvest, and he said, well, we're closing down, we're moving building and downsizing. And they had a room full of stuff. And I said, oh, what's happening to all the old stuff? He said, that's all being thrown away. And I went, hold on, but that's posters and stuff. He went, yeah, it's all been thrown away. I went, well, could I have some? He went, yeah, help yourself. So I took as much as I could carry.
I bet you did.
I took about 40 posters, amazing posters. I've still got them hanging around. I've got posters for Peacock King, Drunken Master. I've got posters from Police Story. I've got posters from, what was that one? Chinese Ghost Story, Savior of Souls. Have you ever seen that one?
I don't think I have.
Amazing martial arts film with incredible fight sequence at the end. And I bought loads of lobby cards. I've got envelope after envelope stuffed with the lobby cards, the black and white and the colour pictures they used to put in the cinemas of these films. So anyway, the Police Story poster I've got, it's a great image. It's an image of Jackie, yellow background, he's just gone like that. And he came and saw it and he went, oh, he said, this is, I won't do the voice, but he said, this is very rare picture of Jackie. How do you have this? And so I told him the story. He went, oh, he said, Jackie doesn't have this. I went, oh. He went, so kind of you. Big fan of give me this. I went, Jackie, I'm not giving you the fucking poster. He went, but you're a big fan of Jackie. I went, yes, I am a big fan of Jackie. He went, so nice would it be for you to give me this poster? I went, I'm not giving you the fucking poster, Jackie. So I've still got it hanging here. And he took me for a lovely meal here in town in London, went for a lovely meal. And even at the end of the meal, he went, I bought you a lovely meal. I went, yeah. He said, will you give me a poster? I said, no, Jackie, the poster's not on the table.
That's a brilliant story. That's absolutely fantastic. You also had the another great cult movie show, which was the Jonathan Ross Presents for 1 week only.
Yeah, well, for 1 week only, I so enjoyed. Once again, doing it was always quite hard. It actually did feel quite hard work because I felt very keenly aware of the responsibility of trying to do them justice. But I enjoyed the success that those shows had, and I wanted to do more stuff. And I loved doing stuff in the world of film. But I felt anyway, that I'd exhausted the kind of people that I would categorize as incredibly strange movie makers. I didn't think David Lynch fit into that category because although his stuff was strange, it had a kind of an emotional depth and a kind of consistency of tone that made it somehow more important. You know, I love these films, but they're fun, disposable watches, you know.
Yeah.
But there was something about Lynch's work. And so I thought, oh, maybe I could do something which is about a different kind of cult filmmaker, ones who have a different sort of vision. And I realized Almodovar fit in that mold quite well. Pedro was just really coming to the fore then a little bit with Atame, Woman on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown, had been quite good, quite big. And then we also did in that, who was the fourth one? Aki Kaurismäki, a man whose work I admire greatly. And he's had a few, he's won prize at Cannes and some of his films are incredible, but he'd never really had the breakout I felt he enjoyed. And there was some more I was thinking of doing, like Emir Costa Rica and a few others. Is it Costa Rica? A few others like that. But we managed to get Lynch to say yes. And it was an interest. Once again, it was just fortuitous for me because Twin Peaks hadn't even come out in England yet. So I'd met Lynch when he came over to promote June, which is I love his version of June. I much prefer it to the really boring Denis Villeneuve ones. He'd come over and I loved his work since I first saw. I saw Eraserhead when it came out in London. I saw it on my 18th birthday at the Scala Cinema, and what a day that was! I went to see that, and then I went to see what was it called? What's the film with Marlon Brando in where he uses butter?
Last Tango in Paris.
Yeah, so that had been re-released. So I saw Eraserhead in the afternoon. Then we had a cheap pasta, me and my best friend Joe, and then we went to see Last Tango in Paris. So I went to do Lynch, and Lynch said, "Oh, we've just had this TV show." And we knew it would come out, and it had been bought for showing in the UK, but hadn't been shown yet. So we agreed to do it, and so I was on the set of when he was filming Twin Peaks 2. I was up in Seattle when he was filming that. And then we went in LA and we went to Bob's Big Boy Diner together. And I kept in touch with David Lynch as well a little bit. And he was just, he remembered me from before. I think the reason he agreed to do it is when he'd come over for June, I was a researcher on a show called The Guardian Lectures, which Channel 4 was showing, where they were filming some of the BFI interviews, some of which, interestingly, I got to host years later. But David Lynch, and we got sent a big list in advance of all the people that were coming up, and we could choose which ones we thought should go in this show for Channel 4. And they knew I loved film, so they gave me the job as being the researcher on it, and I could choose with them who they wanted to do. And so some people, obviously, there were no-brainers. So Clint Eastwood was coming over, so we did him, and Sean Connery, we did him, Bob Mitchum, we did him. David Lynch's name was on the list. And I said to these guys, I was working, we do David Lynch. And they went, no, he's only done one movie. And I went, well, no. I said, what movie is that? And he said, he's done a film called The Elephant Man. I said, yeah, but apart from The Elephant Man, he did a film called Eraserhead, which is one of the most important films of that period of cinema history. And I think it will go on to be seen as this incredible landmark. And none of them had seen or heard of it. And I said, and also, he's just filming June. That's where it's coming up. That's going to be a big budget thing. It's quite interesting. And I've seen some photographs from the set because I used to buy a magazine called Cine Fantastique, which would have early set photographs, because that's the only way you could have that sort of info. And so they kind of begrudgingly agreed to do David Lynch, mainly as well because the guy who was going to interview him was from a magazine called Time Out that was quite big back then, and he was a film critic and he was sort of in the right kind of world for them, and they all listened to him. So we did Lynch. Now when we're doing the Lynch thing, I had to find the clips for the show, so obviously getting the Eraserhead clips was easy. Elephant Man, I had to do a deal with the film company, but I got them. June we were offered promotionally, but his early films had disappeared, and I asked David Lynch, I had his number, and I asked him where they were, and he said, I don't know, they're lost. I said, well, if I can track them down, would we be able to use clips? He said, yeah. I said, okay. So I spent between 3 to 5 months tracking down his early films, speaking to everyone who'd known him back then. So I spoke to Jack Nance. I spoke to Jack Fisk, who was the cinematographer, who was married to Sissy Spacek. But Jack Fisk had been the cinematographer on Eraserhead, but had worked with him previously when he was at this film school in LA. And he said he thought some guy had them in Texas. And the guy in Texas said, no, but I know the guy I think has them. There's a guy over here. And finally, I tracked him down to a warehouse in New Jersey. And the guy said, yeah, I've got them in storage because I got them as a job lot from this other guy because he didn't pay his debt. And I said, well, if we paid the debt, could we get them back? And he said, sure. So I then had to go to Channel 4 and say, if you pay this sort of money, we can get these clips which no one's seen. And David Lynch has lost them as well. So we freed up the only negatives left of the alphabet and the grandmother and one other, I can't remember. And I got them, and I phoned Lynch, and he was so overjoyed. And he said, I can't believe you found them. And I said, he said, well, I tell you what to do. If you get, I'll get them, and when we make copies, I'll send you one for that, and I want you to have one. So he sent them over to me. So I had copies that David Lynch had given me, 16mm of the alphabet and the grandmother, and then I had to use it, and I didn't have anything to show them on, so I thought, well, I'll donate them. So I donated my copies that David had given me to the British Film Institute, and they're in the British Film Institute now. But one of them is missing about 30 seconds because I had to do that. And I was always lying in my early days in TV, pretending I knew what I was doing. So I had to use a Steenbeck, the machine they edit film on. And they said, cut the clips that you need for the show. I said, okay. So I cut them. And I fucking made a mistake and did a big cut right along the middle of a chunk of the alphabet. But it's a film which is on a loop anyway. So I just cut it all out and spliced it together again. So because of my lack of expertise, the copy of the alphabet, which is owned by the BFI, is missing about 30 seconds. because I'm an idiot, basically. But anyway, it was a fabulous time, and we were lucky to get Lynch then. Jodorowsky had just had Santa Sunday had just been released, so he was slightly more on people's radar than previously. But I had loved Holy Mountain and El Topo, so I was thrilled to get him, and that made me think, oh, these are kind of midnight movies. This was that next wave of cult cinema. So the early guys were people who'd made weird, quirky commercial films that showed in drive-ins. I'm generalizing enormously here. These guys, by the time then kind of colleges in America would start doing these midnight showings of strange films, and they would show stuff like Blood Feast, but they would also show El Topo, and they would also show Head, the Monkeys film, and they would show Eraserhead eventually when it came out. So I thought it's a midnight movie thing, but I didn't want to call it midnight movies because it sounded slightly porny for English audiences. So that's why for 1 week only, because that's the kind of thing that those cinemas would show them for. Pedro Almodovar, he had just, I think, what was the one that was coming out? Atome had just come out, but I love Woman on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown, so we were lucky to get him at that stage in his career as well, and that was a fabulous experience, filming in Madrid and then going to New York and filming there. And then finally, it was Aki Kaurismäki, where we went to the film festival that he set up with his brother Aki Kaurismäki, in a place called Sodankula up in the Arctic Circle, the most god-fucking-forsaken place you could ever go to. We were up there. It was freezing cold. It was about 2 hours drive from anywhere else. There was one hotel fully booked. We rented a bedroom from a local family. Me and the director, Andy Harris, were sleeping in children's bunk beds in this house, in this remote village in the Arctic Circle. There was sunlight for like 23 and a half hours of the day. And it was freezing, and there were mosquitoes everywhere. It was so hideous. And the only thing to eat was reindeer. They had no other meat but reindeer. So, and I remember saying to Aki, I said, why on earth would you set your film festival here? And he said, I tell you why. because when I go to Cannes, I hate seeing all the film critics and journalists going there just to have a good time. And my belief is, if you really love cinema, you are prepared to suffer for it.
Yeah.
So you will come to the Arctic Circle at the least popular time of the year and live off reindeer for 2 weeks so you could see movies. And we did actually wind up having a fantastic time. And once again, in many ways, that was the show I was proudest of. And that got the smallest audience because that show went out on Channel 4. And let's face it, a special on Aki Kaurismäki even today isn't going to draw a huge crowd. But back then, it also went out on TV the same night as the first ever Comic Relief, which I was hosting over on BBC One.
Oh, yeah, you were, yeah.
And that was a big show, obviously, because it was a big event. And so we got, but by today's standards, not bad, we got like 200,000 viewers, which filled us with despair at the time, because you were used to getting at least 2 or 3 million for a show like that. Whereas now, these days now, most big shows only get 2 or 3 million because so many other media platforms. And if you get 200,000 or 300,000, some shows consider that a win.
Yeah, very true. You mentioned hosting Comic Relief, but you also hosted the Comedy Awards for a long time.
Yeah.
And you were there for some of the greatest moments, like the Spike Milligan's Little Groveling Bastard.
Yeah, that was
Prince
fun.
Charles. And Julian Clary fisting Norman Lamont. It
was weird because you know, even though to me none of that seems that long ago, of course, everything's changed so dramatically since then. And the joke that Julian made today is exactly the kind of joke that would get made on a mainstream panel show on TV for the last 15 years. But back then it was considered shocking, especially as ITV was much more straight-laced and mainstream then. And I felt for Julian. It was a very funny thing, but he did suffer after that a bit. There was a while where I don't think he cared. I was in touch with him. I don't think he really cared, but he did suffer. He didn't get booked on a bunch of things for a while after that. But it was interesting. And the show was, it kind of, I should have left it earlier because when ITV gave up on it, they gave up on it and then Channel 4 bought it and they asked me if I'd go over and do it. And I was sort of proud of my association with it. But what I hadn't realized is when I went over to Channel 4, it was being made by the company that made it, been bought by someone else. And they were selling tickets to corporate people to come along as an event. So suddenly you had this weird crowd in the audience where they were there for a night out and a drink rather than an award show. And they were bothering everyone on the tables. And also by that stage as well, it was the beginning of like this multi-platform age we live in, where now if you do the comedy awards, there are comedy shows on TV, which I love, or perhaps you love, which 70% of the population have never heard of.
Yeah.
But back then, because it was much more kind of homogenized, or not homogenized, but sort of streamlined our viewing experience, even if you hadn't watched the show, you knew of it. So if a show was getting an award, you know what it was. Whereas now, if you did want to know, towards the end we were doing that, there'd be shows mentioned. I'd be giving out awards to shows I hadn't even fucking heard of. They walked on stage. So and so really, I should have left that. The last 2 or 3 were pretty terrible, I thought, really. But all the years on ITV were, once again, they're of their time. I don't know if they'd stand up to repeated viewing, but they were fun, and I loved it because it was. This is when comedy was very much more of a broad church than it is now, where you did have. We had shows where we would give out an award to Des O'Connor, who was doing a very, very good comedy talk show for years. He always had good comedy guests on. And we give one
Stan Borman, the Fockers.
Yeah, but he also he brought Letterman over. Letterman came over and was a guest on Des O'Connor's talk show. You know, so it's like he had an eye for like new comedians, American comedians particularly, he was well aware of. And then we'd have Cilla Black getting an award, but we'd also have the cast of Desmond's there, for example. And we'd have the royal family would be getting awards, you know what I mean? And so the Fast Show alongside giving a lifetime achievement award to someone like Norman Wisdom, you know. So I loved the fact that it was the bringing together of all those different styles and different ages.
Oh, that's a shame. It was you didn't enjoy it towards the end.
Well, I don't think anyone did. It wasn't just me. I mean, the audience decided it was no good either.
I used to enjoy it. If it was on, I'd watch it, laugh, and always look out for the them controversial moments. So you took over for Barry Norman on film. What was that like? Because obviously that was the mainstream big film show.
Well, it was the film show I'd grown up watching and loving, and I admired and respected Barry Norman. I didn't always agree with him, but I think one of the strengths of that show, and hopefully, and it would have been a strength when I was doing it as well, was when you've got one person reviewing things, if you watch it a few times, you figure out what they like and what they don't like and whether it tallies with you. And so you don't expect, because there's no universal truth about an opinion. It is always just an opinion, and hopefully it's founded in a certain amount of knowledge and awareness and responsibility as to what kind of film is this, why has it been made, who's it for. Because just because a movie doesn't work for you doesn't mean it isn't a good movie, but you can normally see whether it's a well-made film even if you don't particularly like that kind of film. And so after a while, I remember going back to David Lynch, I remember when Eraserhead came out and Barry kind of scratching his head and saying, I don't understand this, I don't know why anyone would want to go and see it, something along those lines. But I remember seeing the clips and saying, fuck yeah, I'm going to go and see that the minute I can. And so I knew he didn't like that kind of stuff. So, and that didn't weaken his voice as a critic to me. It just made me aware of his likes and dislikes.
Yeah.
And therefore, I could temper my reaction to things based on what I knew of him. And so I was thrilled to be given the job. I mean, it was a major kind of step in my life, because I think it had meant so much to me what he had done. And bear in mind, when I first took over, beginning of 2000, still it was early internet. So you could go online to see trailers and interviews, but it wasn't the plethora of material available now. Now, those shows are sort of rendered somewhat pointless, unfortunately, because there's so much online content covering the same thing. And so there isn't a feeling of, doesn't feel special in any way, particularly, I don't think. And that's what we have so many podcasts now and vlogcasts or whatever you call them. So it was exciting for me to take over from him in that way. And I knew him a bit, and he went off to do, I think it was a fallout over money. I think BBC possibly wanted to freshen it up with a new face, but also he'd asked for not a huge amount, I don't think, but a bit more money, and they said no. And then he went off and did it and Sky for a couple of years, and then it just fizzled out. But it was very, very exciting, and I think I learned quite a lot doing it, because when I first started, I was quite aggressively critical if I didn't think something worked. And then after a while, I got to the stage of mind which I was sort of just describing, which is, oh no, just because it doesn't work for me doesn't mean it's not good.
Yeah.
It just means it's not for me. And so I like to think I became more aware of the responsibility and more circumspect and a bit more measured as time went on when I was talking about films.
It was a great show, and I was very sad to see you go. Is it true you were voted sexiest male voice by a condom company?
If it is, this is news to me.
Right. Well, I found this little nugget while searching for info on you. So, Trojan.
I find this implausible. However, I don't know who's voted for this, but belatedly, thank you.
There we go, that one.
My voice is many things. It's not fucking sexy.
Well, according to Trojan Condom Company, sexiest male voice on the radio. There you go.
Oh, your voice is sexier than mine, Paul, and that's saying something.
Well, I'm like broad northern, you know what I mean? I wouldn't say my voice is sexy at all. I do radio much like yourself.
I think we're both a shout for the next poll.
Yeah, that's it. Give me a shout next time. Also, from what I've read, your first concert was an xrayspex gig. How did that shape your musical tastes and things?
Well, I look back on my life and realize in so many ways I've been very lucky, and maybe everyone feels this way, and I hope they do, but to have been born when I was and where I was, because I was born in London in 1960. So I turned 16 at the end of 1976. So I think I was 15 or just turned 16 when I saw the Pistols on the Tonight Show or the Today Show with Grundy. And I remember thinking I was terrified of them, but so excited by what I saw. And then I started buying the NME every week and Sounds to find out what this new punk movement was. And this was pretty early days still, because they were still all playing. I mean, the Roxy Club was still going. So almost within the space of about 2 weeks, I'd cut my hair a bit shorter and spiked it up a bit and started buying clothes from charity shops and ripping them up and walking down the high street, terrified but excited to be part of this new movement with pins on me. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to go and see my first band. And so I went to see, I think it was just after Christmas 96. So it was like early 97. And I was only really a punk for about a year because it fizzled out the proper first wave of punk fizzled out mid '97. And so I could still go. So I went to see my first gig. It was, I think, 50 pence or 60 pence to get in. I think it was 50 pence. And it was at the Hope.
Back in them 70s, cheap prices.
Yeah. Well, you'd go out for the evening. You'd have £3 with you. That was enough to get you in somewhere, buy 4 or 5 beers, and buy chicken and chips on the way home for £3, £3.50. That was it. That's all you needed. And so I remember getting the tube to Angel Islington. I was on my own. I didn't know any other punks. Terrified. And back then, London was still really not what it is today. It hadn't really been, I mean, everywhere's been gentrified now, or certainly been repaired. Islington was still kind of a wasteland. I mean, Islington now is a very, very popular, very middle-class area. Back then, you walk down Islington High Street, shops were all boarded up, buildings were empty. Some of them still had windows blown out and roofs missing from the Second World War. They hadn't got around to rebuilding stuff. Even in the 70s, the 60s, they started rebuilding everything. And so it was a moment of revelation, just hearing this noise and being in this tiny club and literally, 2 feet from the stage, 2 feet from polystyrene, and there was Laura Logic, and it was like, and then I got in the tube on the way home, and I stand there, and Laura Logic and the bass player who went on to form Classic Nouveau were in the lift with me, and I was like, I was this schoolboy at school the next morning. I couldn't believe it, and I was like, oh my God, these are the people who made that music, and I didn't speak to them, I was too nervous. So that was an incredible experience, and then I went on to see many of the early punk bands. By then, the Clash had got enough success. They went off to America to record their second album, and they weren't playing anywhere. But I saw them perform at the Rock Against Racism in Hackney, and I saw Generation X, Buzzcocks, The Boys, The Jam. I didn't see the Sex Pistols until they reformed because they'd been banned by the GLC and lots of local councils were making it hard for them. And now, bizarrely, I'm quite close friends with John Lydon, which is quite exciting. He phoned me about a week ago. He's back in town. He's back in the UK. But it was a formative thing for me. Punk was a major thing for me. And it kind of, in a way, imbues a certain attitude towards you, to sort of like be wary of establishment. But then as you grow older, you realize that they weren't anti-establishment so much as they were anti-hypocrisy, and anti-privilege for the wrong reasons, the whole punk movement, my interpretation of it anyway. So at heart, I suppose I'm still a punk, which surprises some people, but I've got a lot of punk memorabilia here. I've got most of the clothes I wore, and I've got some of the posters and stuff here in my office. So it's still something, and it's still something I listen to on a regular basis. I'll still put the Pistols on, the Damned on. I mean, the Damned were great. Gen X, I love. 999, I even had a soft spot for. Susie and the Banshees, I saw about 4 times before they were signed. Really happy time. So excited to be there in the middle of this incredible movement as it happened.
And I mean, talking about punk, you were also there with the New Romantic movement as well.
Well, that came, because after punk, we all floundered around looking what to do. So I dabbled with being a mod for a while. I tried out rockabilly for a short period. But I always liked electro stuff and that. I was a big fan of the original Ultravox. And then when New Romantic came along, it just seemed like fun because I liked dressing up. So the chance to put on, to try and make something, I'd buy oversized clothes from the secondhand shop, the charity shops, and try and make a zoot suit for myself, and to go out wearing clothes. And I went through a beatnik phase where I grew a goatee and would carry a jazz album around under my arm, trying to look intelligent, and a copy of Jack Kerouac on the road in my back pocket. It was kind of just trying on identities, really. But I was never as big a fan of the New Romantic movement. I mean, I like the production on Spandau and Duran Duran and bands from that period, but still my first love had been that kind of sort of like more energetic 3-minute burst of madness that a punk single would be.
Absolutely fantastic. Now, moving on a few years, Japanorama. Got to talk about Japanorama. How did that come about? And obviously, it was on BBC Choice, and it ran for quite a few seasons as well, didn't it?
Well, I'd always loved, as you know, I mean, I loved, I loved movies that were outside the mainstream, and so I'd been turned on to the kind of adult anime. I don't mean the sex anime, although I saw some like Orotsukudoji, but stuff like the early Ghibli stuff and Akira. And so I'd made a show for Channel 4, one-off. I can't remember what it was called, but I did a one-off in about '99, which was one of the first UK television shows ever to talk about anime on it.
Yeah.
And we had a clip from Porco Rosso on that. I think so. It's still early Ghibli days. It was long before Spirited Away. I think it was around the period they were probably making Castle in the Sky then, I think. And so I loved that, and I had a real love of Japanese comic strips. There were the American publishers, Viz, and a couple of other publishers have been republishing English language versions of the classics. So you could get Otomo's Akira in English form. Well, that was published by, I think, an imprint on Marvel. I think that was Epic. They were beautifully coloured as well. And I got hold of, there was Mai the Psychic Girl, which I loved. And Tim Burton had the rights to for a while. Whenever I meet Tim, I'm always saying, please get off your arse and finally make Mai. It was Mai the Psychic Girl. There was that. There was Lone Wolf and Cub, which was Koichi's incredible comic series. That was published by Image, I think. So amazing stuff coming over. And I thought, okay, I love Japanese culture anyway. I can't remember how I pitched it to them, but I said, I want to do something on this. And I think I started buying, I always loved Japanese gimmicks and technology. And I think they were just happy to have me do something on Choice because I was a big name on BBC One at the time. And Choice became BBC Three eventually. So it was kind of like their weirder, they went for stranger stuff. And so we went out, we filmed the first series, and it was quite hard work because I don't know if you've ever been to Tokyo, but it's massive. And so
I'd love to go to Tokyo.
Tokyo's amazing.
Never been.
So but it's about eight Londons joined together. I mean, it's huge. So to travel from one location to another would take you 3 or 4 hours. And so when we did the second series, to try and circumvent that, we pretended I had a flat there, and we set up a studio, and we had people come to us, which obviously made it much more efficient time-wise because they could be traveling while you were doing the interview, and then the next person would arrive. And so I was very pleased to do it. And I was going to do a third season, but I was hanging out with Adam and Joe at the time, and they had a love of that kind of thing. And they liked the idea of doing something. I said, well, look, rather than me host it, why don't we send you guys out and we'll do a different show? Because I wanted to keep it fresh. I was producing it as well. So then we did Adam and Joe Go Tokyo, which was a great series as well. And they obviously brought they're kind of like double act comic sensibility to it. And they did some amazing stuff out there. So we had a lot of fun making them, and I was very happy to meet them. I mean, do you know the comic book artist Junji Ito?
I don't.
Junji Ito, there's a series based on his short horror stories on Netflix you can watch, which isn't bad. But his dark, horrific horror manga are amazing. Uzumaki, which means spiral, is a great one. And Spiral, so I interviewed him, and I was a huge fan. I was trying to do these interviews. I'd do like 50, because we were using like a 3 or 4 minute chunk from each interview. So I tried to do it in 15, 20 minutes. And I was meant to have 15 minutes with him. And we were doing the interview, and I was so into it. Someone came and tapped me and said, you've got to stop. I said, why? He said, you've done an hour. He has to go, but he's too polite to tell you. And I tried to, I said to Junji-san, do you ever sell your artwork? I would love a piece of your artwork to put on my wall. And he said, no, I don't sell it. I said, but if ever you change your mind, please do consider me, because I would make sure it was respected and I would enjoy seeing it every day. And then about a year later, just out of the blue, a parcel turned up for me from Japan, and he had drawn an incredible piece of art with just me. It's a portrait of me done in a manga style, but with all of the main characters from his different horror manga around me. And I've got that hanging at my office at home.
Oh, that's superb.
Yeah. So Japanorama I love doing, and I would consider doing more stuff in Japan. But, you know, as is always the case, these days TV is rapidly changing. I mean, TV as we know it will be dead in 3 years, I think. So it's like, to try and get funding for something like that, you can, you know, if you go to some of the small channels, they might back it, but they always want it to be more of a kind of journey. They want something a bit more like Clarkson's Farm or something like that, where they get a series they don't want an anthology show where you're looking at different artists or different talented people in chunks like that so much anymore. But I would do more like that. But also, it takes a long while to shoot. And even though it's exciting to be part of that, you go to somewhere like Tokyo, when you're filming that, you're just working the whole time. You don't really get to enjoy being there. So frankly, I'd rather go to Tokyo on holiday than to film again. Especially
now with the nice big Godzilla hotel. I bet that's amazing.
Yeah, that does.
It does, and you can go into Godzilla's mouth and things like that. That's what we all want.
It's not been a passion of mine, but I'm sure it'll be fun.
Yeah. So sticking with the Eastern and Asian vibe, Stop Kung Fu with Ricky Baker, or as he was called on the show, Kung Fu Ricky.
Kung Fu Wiki, once again, still had I had a deep love of martial arts movie. I still do. I watched. Have you seen? Is it called Shaolin 36 Chamber or 36?
Love the film 36 Chamber of Shaolin.
Yeah, I watched that again about a month ago. You know, I love those films. Drunken Master 2 is one of my favorite films of all time. Savior of Souls, which is, I think what it's called. You should definitely watch that if you haven't seen it. It's amazing.
I'll find it and watch it.
Have you seen Peacock King?
No.
Peacock King's got Huen Bio in, and it's got some great special effects. He plays a monk who's got to try and join up with some other people to try and stop the 7 or 8 gateways to hell opening up around Earth.
Oh, that sounds right up my street.
A monster who comes out of this, and then their face opens up that way with the teeth on either side. The whole face splits in half. Like, I think it's stop motion. It's amazing. So I love that kind of stuff. BBC choice. And the thing about that show is we can make it quite cheaply because we didn't even use a proper studio. We just hired a space, set stuff up, brought guests in to chat, filled it with ideas, great clips. They helped us get the clips cheap. And so it was just a kind of fun. Did we do 2 series of that or 1?
I think it was 2 seasons.
I think we did 2 seasons. And still in touch with Ricky today. He's a lovely bloke. But once again, you know, you kind of get to the stage where you've kind of done as much of that. And then by then, Hong Kong cinema, because I then did a series called, I think it was called Chinese Ghost Stories for a spin-off. It wasn't really a series, but I introduced a bunch of movies on Channel 4. So films like A Chinese Ghost Story, like Rouge by Stanley Kwan, which is an amazing film. And then that period, Hong Kong cinema had a very, very specific identity, and I was very, very enamored of it. Now, not so much. Now I'm not as excited about Hong Kong cinema or even Japanese cinema. Now it's Korean cinema is the most interesting from that part of the world, I think. And Thai cinema is also quite interesting. And I quite like some of the stuff that comes from different parts of India. You know, there's the Tamil movies. But certainly I would consider doing more films, though. But once again, I don't know whether there's an audience for that would justify the cost for a mainstream channel, because you get guys do it on YouTube now, you know, and do it well.
This is true. Moving on to comics, where did your love of comics come from? Obviously, because we didn't get a lot of the American stuff like we didn't up north.
Well, no, we didn't get them that much down south either. But I did. There was a period, obviously, when they were coming over regularly, because I fell in love with comics. You used to be able to buy them from junk shops, and they'd have a big pile of comics with a big 3 written on the front for 3p. They were 3p each in bloody black ink, like a black marker, right over the cover. Heartbreaking. And I remember I managed to get. They had a copy of Fantastic Four #3 with no cover, which I bought for a penny, which I've still got somewhere. And I read and reread them. And so I started collecting them. And I just loved, in particular, I love Marvel, because what Stan Lee did, and Stan Lee is a much maligned figure these days. And to an extent, that's justifiable. But at the same time, he was a genius, I think, in that he did things with comics that hadn't been done before. He put them all in the same universe. He gave them more of a soap opera quality. He did longer running continuing stories. He gave the comic company a breezy house style where you felt you were part of a club. If you're reading Marvel, you were a member of Marvel in a way. And so I fell in love with those comics, and they never really went away. I loved them all my life. And there was a period then when you could still buy them. They were quite hard to find, but then they started redistributing them in the UK for a while. This was early 70s. So it started again with like Spidey 119 appeared, and then they stopped for a few years. So we didn't get 120, 121. They started coming over about 140, I think. And so you could buy them in newsagents still. But when I was a kid growing up, they were coming over. So every week I'd go and see if there are any new ones in. And we're talking about early 70s, really, when they were coming over regularly again. And so I started buying them with, you know, passionate fervor then. And then punk happened in my life, and I kind of drifted away a bit. But I still kept reading them, but they weren't the number one thing for me, music. And like that, yeah. The scene became that. And then I was lucky that when I became a student, that's when the kind of like underground comics bled into the mainstream more. And they weren't just kind of like drug related, like the Crumb stuff was, which was more interesting than that. But, you know, they weren't just silly hippie comics. You got Raw magazine and the wave of new publishers in America, like Eclipse and Pacific. And so that was exciting to be buying that stuff, and like small self-published stuff that became big, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which were great fun. And then you had Frank Miller. You had the wave of creators who'd grown up with comics now making comics. And so you had Frank Miller and Jim Starlin and those guys who'd taken over from the previous wave. So it was just a very exciting thing. And still, I still buy comics. I don't read them as much, but I do buy them. And I'm still very immersed in that period of comic books. I still love those early Marvel and DC from that period as well. Well, DC in the 70s became super cool.
Yeah, Neil Adams doing Batman and stuff like
yeah,
that.
Neil Adams. In a way, I think I prefer Jim Aparo even, but those Neil Adams and Dennis O'Neill books were amazing. But then I'm thinking more of when Bernie Wrightson started doing Swamp Thing, and they also had Mike Kaluta doing The Shadow. And I don't know if you can see it from here. I'll try and angle my camera for you. I've got a giant picture of The Shadow on the wall there. Can you see that giant?
Oh, do you know something I've recently been listening to help us get to sleep? The old radio, Shadow radio players from back in the...
What, the Orson Welles one?
No, it was after that.
Oh, I love reading The Shadow. Over there, I've got a paperback spinning thing from an old newsagent, and I've got all the Shadow novels that came out again in the 70s. They're a great read.
Brilliant. I'll bet you they are. They're fantastic. Now, if you could curate an exhibition of your favourite comic book covers, which ones would make the cut?
It would be Jim Steranko's cover to Giant Size Hulk 1. It would be kind of half a dozen of the early Ditko Spider-Man covers. I particularly like, well, the early ones were great. I mean, some of the early FF covers by Kirby, maybe Superman Unchained by Neil Adams, where he's breaking the bonds of kryptonite for the first time with that gold background. Then there might be a few later period ones. I mean, even though I'm not a big fan of Todd McFarlane, his Spider-Man covers were pretty good and his Hulk covers were great. But I'm more into the artists specifically than the one-off image by them, because the thing about genuinely great comic book artists know how to tell a story as well. They don't just do a great cover image. But Gil Kane was the big Marvel cover artist in the 70s. He did a number of amazing covers. All of his Warlock, his early stuff, he did Warlock early on, but he did Captain Marvel for a while before Jim Starlin took over, which was great. Jim Starlin was amazing. I couldn't really choose even a small group. I love too many of them.
So I've got, now this takes us to In Search of Steve Ditko, that fantastic documentary. What was it like meeting him? Because obviously he wouldn't come on video.
Yeah, it was very exciting to meet him. I mean, it was fortuitous. I only went up to see him, so I knew he was up there, and I thought, I'll just go and say hello. And I didn't film it because he didn't want to film it, and he didn't mind me saying hello because I was in touch with him a bit. I had a few phone calls with him afterwards and exchanged a few letters afterwards. But certainly he was someone whose work had meant so much to me, along with Kirby. I wrote a fan letter to Kirby when I was a kid, but I didn't know the address, so he probably never got it. I just put Jack Kirby, California. So he wouldn't have got to him, I don't think. But I did love Ditko's work so much and still continue to look at it with just absolute admiration and amazement. So it was very nice to meet him, and he gave me a pile of comic books, which I've still got separate from all the others, some of his self-published stuff. I had a beat-up copy of Amazing Fantasy 15 with me, and I said, oh, look, I've got this. And he went, oh, and I said, have you got a copy? I'll give you this if you haven't got it. He went, oh, and that's when I think he knew I wasn't there to try and make anything of my time with him. And then he said, no, let me give you some. But he told me an amazing story about it. He said, they got the colors wrong on that. And he pointed at Spider-Man's costume. I went, what do you mean? He went, well, when I drew it, I said that should be orange and purple because there was already a big hero who was blue and red. I didn't want to be the same colors, and they went with blue and red. So you think his idea was that Spider-Man's original costume would have been orange and purple. I don't know which order. I guess purple on the main body and orange on the top. And I think he would have thought that was more a naturally occurring color in like spiders, see those kind of colors. And I guess he was referring to Superman with the other character. I don't know for sure. But it was certainly, one of the more memorable moments of my life, meeting Steve Ditko.
I mean, I was introduced to him with Strange Tales 121. When I was a kid, my dad used to do house clearances.
Was that the origin of Doctor Strange in 121?
No, it was. He goes into this haunted house.
Right. Yeah, I know it. That was one of the that was one of the kind of slighter stories, wasn't it? Because they used to do occasional like standalone ones like that. And then there were the bigger ones that had Dawn in and the ancient one more running through them.
That's right. Yeah. But and it's something to do with the TV show. I've got the comic.
Yeah, he goes to appear on a TV show, doesn't he, where they're debunking mysticism, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's it. You take him to this house.
Well, Steve Ditko came up with Doctor Strange on his own. I mean, and that's why it's kind of, as I was saying earlier on about Stan Lee being somewhat maligned, because that's in a letter page around the time. Someone wrote into one of the Marvel comics, said, I love the work you and Steve did together on Spider-Man. Have you got anything else planned? And he said, we're trying out a new character, a kind of a magician guy. It was Steve's idea. And that's in a letter page in Marvel that Stan wrote. And then years later, he's conveniently forgotten all about that.
Well, it took him ages. Well, you kind of put him down to the wire. Will you admit that Steve Ditko co-created Spider-Man?
Yeah, which is in my opinion. But I feel a bit sorry for Stan, even though he's dead now, of course, so he doesn't care. But I feel a bit sorry for him because he was a genius, you know. Yeah. And without Stan doing what he did, we wouldn't have the Marvel universe in the way we have it today. You know, we just wouldn't. And so his contribution was enormous, but his hogging of credits was unappealing.
Yeah, well, he did. He kind of took credit for a hell of a lot of stuff. Yeah. Which a lot of the, I mean, look at the whole Bill Finger,
Bob Kane.
Carry on.
Yeah.
You know, it's a big shame. We're nearly done. I've got to ask you, how chaotic is the Big Fat Quiz of the Year? Big Fat Quiz of the Year is kind of chaotic, but in a way, that's what makes it fun. I mean, yeah, you know, because I came up with the idea for that, and I was going to host it, and the BBC didn't want it, and I was under exclusive contract to the BBC, and I said, well, I'm going to pitch it somewhere else, and I pitched it to Channel 4. We got Jimmy Carter host it, and Jimmy's a great host for it, and it's a very different show with him doing it. But there are times when it has been too chaotic, and we've had to go back re-record stuff when it got out of hand. But overall, now it's actually much more of a finely run machine than it was previously. And it's still something I look forward to. And I always say every year, because my company makes it, and I always say, look, if you need me, I'm here, I'll do it. But, you know, book whoever's the best available. And if you can't get anyone else, I'm available. So I sometimes do it still. But I'm not someone who pushes myself forward into it. You know, I just want it to be a fun show for the viewers. I'll be honest, I was gutted, and I'm gutted when you don't appear because I'm such a fan. Oh, well, thank you. But yeah, so, and obviously the Masked Singer, how weird is that? It's kind of weird, but it's kind of great fun. I tell you what I love about doing the Masked Singer. It's a bit weird when you do it. It becomes a bit Groundhog Day. When you're on day 5 or 6 of the recording and you've already seen all of the costumes, it's a bit hard because you're trying to think of new things to say about someone dressed as a toaster, but you've used your best toaster material, you know, and so you've used your best toaster material. Yeah. And it's like, okay, where do I come? What angle do I come in with now? But what I love about it is it's so lovely doing the show because so many people come along with little kids, and it really is a big popular show for families to watch together. And it's so very nice to be part of a show where little kids love it. And quite a lot of the time when I'm out and I'll see little kids will look at me and I think, and, you know, it takes me a second or two to realize where they know me from. And then I realize, oh, Masked Singer. Yeah. And so, you know, then I'll say, oh, do you watch the Masked Singer? And they go, yeah. And then they'll often chant, take it off on me. And I have to make sure nothing weird's going on. And the last question, obviously, you're a very quirky person, but what's the quirkiest item in your home that has an interesting backstory? I've got a few weird things. One of which I probably can't tell you about because it would make the papers and I'd be embarrassed, but it was a present that Jimmy Carr gave me. So I'll tell you about that afterwards when we stop recording. Yeah, no problem. What I've got a facsimile of a skeleton of Siamese twins from a Victorian collection. That's pretty weird, but there's not a huge backstory to that. I think my wife bought it for me as a present. What have I got there? I'm trying to, because the thing, you know, the thing is, Paul, this is the weird thing is when you say I'm a quirky person, I do not think of myself as a quirky person. And I do not think of the things I have passion for as quirks. No. I think of them as just great stuff, you know. So, but I can. As I do, and we've got a lot of similar. I'll reach a foot away from me here and I will grab a nice size model of Two-Face. Great. You know, and then I'll put him down and I'll reach over here and I've got one of the band Gorillas in a spacesuit. And then funny enough, it looks like the new Fantastic Four. I know, I'm looking forward to that. It should be good. And then over there behind me, I think you can see it there. Well, on that side, you'll see
Galactus.
Brilliant.
And over there, you'll see a Sentry.
Yeah.
So everywhere you look in here, I've got stuff which I love, but when other people see it, they say, "What is all this junk?"
Yeah.
But for
Same
me,
with me,
it's stuff. You know that when you're a collector, or you love what you love, and when someone might say to you, "I don't know what's your main collection, Paul?"
Oh God, I've got a lot of horror film stuff because horror films has been my big thing. I've got a Return of the Swamp Thing bust,
Nice.
1-to-1 bust. A mate of mine makes brilliant stuff from horror films. And
Like
so he made me it.
Yeah, I've got a good. Hang on here, I'll get you my good man thing model. Hold on.
Oh, Man Thing. Oh wow,
I think
that is beautiful.
I think it's one of those Randy Bowen kits. So it's pretty lovely. I just put it back. I'm going to hold it carefully.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And here's a Morbius the Living Vampire kit that I built and painted up a little while ago.
Oh wow. Oh, you do like the best Marvel and DC characters.
Well, that 70s period when I was still a kid, you see, I was like,
yeah.
I was 10 in 1970. So that period, it was so formative, that these characters appeared. Look at him. He's great, isn't he?
Yeah. Oh, he's fantastic.
Yeah.
I've got a Morbius somewhere figure because I've got a few of the Marvel horror figures. I've got some Swamp Thing figures.
Yeah, I love the
Wolverine's always been a big one for me.
I quite love Wolverine, but see, Wolverine came along. I loved Wolverine, but that period, because you're a bit younger than me, I was getting older by then.
Yeah.
So stuff that really I loved was Werewolf by Night, the Marvel Frankenstein, Swamp Thing, Morbius, anything by, remember Atlas Comics that came out for about a year? That was set up by Martin Goodman as a kind of revenge on Marvel. They were brilliant. I love those. I've got all of them on a spinner rack in my other room in there.
Fantastic. I've got a few. Doctor Strange is a big one. To be fair, I've got a big Marvel Milestones statue of Doctor Strange, which was 300-400 quid, and I found one on eBay for 35.
Yeah, that's a bargain.
Yeah, this was about 15 years ago now. Yeah. Finding that now, it wouldn't happen. This was before the big MCU revival with the films and TV shows and all the rest of it, which I enjoy. The films I do and some of the TV shows. But yeah, horror things. I've got a big 18-inch Keaton Batman.
Wow.
Ed 209 and RoboCop, the kind of Hot Toys ones.
Love RoboCop.
Ice, what do you think of the MCU and the new DC films?
I mean, I quite like
as a whole.
As a whole, I'm pleased they exist. There've been some great films. I think the Avengers, those two Endgame movies were great. The first Avengers film was great. The first Captain America was really good, and the Winter Soldier was good. I like most of the Spider-Man movies. I don't like many of the Sony movies. They're all pretty bad. Some of the DC films I like. I like The Dark Knight. That's a really good film. I'm not that big a fan of the other Nolan Batman films. I think they're a bit dreary.
Yeah.
But that one had genuine excitement and an amazing film. So overall, I like them. I mean, Marvel have fumbled recent attempts. I think they've not been very good, but I haven't seen Thunderbolts yet. I hear that's not bad. And I'm looking forward to Fantastic Four, but it kind of doesn't bother me one way or the other, because on the one hand, I'm pleased it exists and I'm pleased that new people know and love those stories. On the other hand, the comic books for me are still the kind of holy grail, and I'll still return to the comic books. That run of Fantastic Four that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby did, those first 101 issues, are amazing. Spider-Man from 1 up to about 130, some amazing storylines and artwork and developments in that. The Hulk over the years, I love those. I love the Herb Trimpe period as well as the early Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko days, very early on, and Gil Kane.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of just comics generally. I'm looking forward to what James Gunn's going to do with Superman. That looks like it's going to be really good. I felt sorry for poor old Henry Cavill, who I thought was perfect casting, but none of the movies were that good, you know. So I always look forward to seeing them. But if the movie's good, I'll love it as a good movie. Doesn't have to have superheroes in it. I mean, in a way, John Wick is kind of a superhero movie. You know, I love those Wick films. So I do like them, but it doesn't bother me as a fan of comics. And when they betray, or not betray, but when they change the law or the canon, that doesn't bother me. I mean, I know in the new FF you've got Juliet something, and then Julia is playing Silver Surfer. So they've obviously changed the story.
She's playing Shalabal, isn't she?
She's playing Shalabal, who of course was Norrin Radd's partner back on the planet that he'd come from. And so they've just switched who became the Surfer for Galactus, I guess. But I'm not.
But she does become the Surfer at some point, doesn't she?
Yeah, but it's not early lore, is it? You know what I mean? Like the Silver Surfer for us is that first Silver Surfer appeared in FF51, I think.
Yeah, you're right. 100%. No. Thoughts on the Blade films, especially the first two. The third one was.
You know what? I like all of them. I particularly like the second one. Guillermo del Toro's take on it was amazing.
Yeah.
I've interviewed Wesley a couple of times. He's great fun. But I love those films. And in a way, he's the first kind of MCU character, really. Marvel Cinematic, isn't he? He's the first big guy they put up there. I know
He was the first one, yeah.
Before, but, you know, there was a new, was it New World Cinema? Was Corman's company, had an FF movie. There's a Doctor Strange TV movie that you've perhaps seen. I don't know.
I've seen and got on Blu-ray.
Not great, but fun.
No, but I can remember seeing it on VHS as a kid. And because I was already a Doctor Strange fan, I was like, this is fantastic. This is brilliant. I don't care. I just loved it.
Yeah.
And then obviously, you know, you get years later, you realise it's not as good.
Yeah.
I've seen it again. It was on late night ITV when ITV started doing the 24 hours through the night. They put it on, and I watched it again. I was like, it's not as good.
Not as good.
But, right. Well, we'll call it a day. And once we're off this, I've got a few little things I want to ask you to do. And so we'll call it a day. Thank you, Jonathan, for being here. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have.
I've enjoyed trying to work out what's going on with your beard. It's kind of brown on the top half, and then it goes white below. It's quite something.
Yeah, it's ginger. Ginger, which is turning white. And then if you look underneath, it's black.
Jesus.
My daughter.
Jesus, make your mind up.
I know. It's one of those. It's a weird one. Thanks for mentioning the beard. That's fantastic. But no, thank you so much for being here. It has been an absolute pleasure. And keep doing what you're doing because we all love it, man.
Oh, thank you, Paul. You're very kind. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Steve Kostansky, director of Frankie Frico, Psycho Gorman, and co-director of The Void, here to tell you to check out the Carlisle Cult Cinema Club. Check out their Facebook page and their YouTube channel. Make sure you hit like and subscribe and do all that good stuff. While you're at it, check out The Instructor. Pretty fun movie. Bye.